Alright, I wanted to do a quick and dirty color tutorial to help you guys do some editing on your photos. Just give them a little extra punch and a little more control in the color category. Now, I know I've previously said that I want you guys to be avid photographers and not avid editors. However, everyone is editing their photographs, myself included, and it would be irresponsible of me to not show you something. So I don't want you to lean on these tools. I just want you to have them in your arsenal so that when you need to do some extra editing or you wanted to give it your extra kind of style or look, you can do so. So I'm just going to be in Camera Raw and I'm currently in Bridge. I don't have anything special going on. I just have the basic program here. You should have this available to you by now. Now, you should have received the announcement on Canvas that Adobe CC should be available to you at home. All you got to do is get Creative Cloud, log in with your UWGB email, and you should be able to download and access all the software you need. And all you really need is Adobe Bridge and Adobe Photoshop. So that's all I'm going to be using here, and we're only going to be using Adobe Camera Raw. So this should all seem fairly familiar on navigating the menus and where to find some things, but I'm just going to go into some extra tools that are going to help you control color in a lot more nuance. Now I've already done some edits and you can see how we can get some really different profiles going on here. So this is the same image, the same light, just some different edits on color. And you can see how color not only changes the physical color itself, but also the sort of tonal values, what's apparent, what different things come out. If you didn't notice before, Lydia has quite a bit of freckles on her face. Depending on how we handle that color, it shows them a little bit more, a little bit less. So we're going to play with this a little bit. So I'm going to open up a new image here, and this I'm just going to double click, and it's going to open in Camera Raw. Fantastic. And I'm going to take you through a couple of tools here and just to control color in different ways. I'm going to try to move through this smoothly in a good kind of manner, and you can kind of follow the same steps and kind of move through these. Now you won't always need to use every single one of these tools every single time you open an image, but you can certainly pick and choose a couple of them and choose how you like to use them, and then kind of rinse and repeat those. Now I'm noticing this image is a little soft, so I don't really want to edit that. So I'm going to go back one or two. Let's try this one. Yeah, good enough. Okay, so I'm going to edit some profiles here. So on the right here, I'm just in my basic panel. There is a profile right here that we're going to change first. Okay. Now this color profile is treating your image essentially how it comes out of the camera. So every camera has a slightly different base color profile that it uses. You might see if you open up your camera, you could see portrait profile, landscape profile, and this kind of changes the saturation, the vibrancy, the contrast, and the brightness of each and every single image that you take, and how it's basically processing those files before it even gets on the computer or does anything else. Now you can certainly replicate these different profiles if you want to. But Adobe Raw now has this really great feature where you can emulate older profiles, sometimes from film or just from different things people have created in the past. So there's some really nice presets in here that just get you in the right direction a lot quicker. So if we go ahead and click on these four little squares in the top right corner, just Profile Matrix and these four little squares, it'll give you a little pop-up that says Browse Profiles. So we're going to click on that. Now a good way to think about this too is just thinking about your camera processing these files a little bit differently. So instead of that happening in your camera, it's just happening in Adobe Bridge. Fantastic. Now in the old days when we did this with film, each film manufacturer had a slightly different film profile for color that was built into the actual emulsion. So if you bought Fuji or you bought Kodak, they would have slightly different color profiles that changed the way any color would get processed. So reds, blues, and greens all looked a little bit different depending on what kind of film you bought. So we're going to just play with those similar ideas. So down here in profiles, there's a couple different carrots. Now we're not going to worry about black and white because we're talking mostly about color. So we're going to kind of skip over those. But in the future, you're certainly welcome to use these and kind of process in really interesting ways. So in artistic, modern, and vintage, I think there are approximately between 8 and 10 different versions. What I'm going to do is kind of create a before and after image. So on the left is going to be our original, and on the right is going to be after we use our profile. So you can see how much change these really do, okay? So notice the way every single color is being shifted, how some might not be shifted, how some just affect shadows or just highlights, and how some totally change everything and it makes yellows blues and blues yellows in some cases. So I want you to kind of browse through these when you're going through your images and just get you into the right spot. Now, depending on where you're already at with your color balance, you might have some different options or different things that seem better or worse. If I'm looking at the before and after here, you see on the left that it looks pretty warm, pretty yellow, a little green. And on the right, it's looking way too magenta and blue. So maybe there's a middle ground between those two, but maybe you're just making an artistic decision to say, I want this image to be a little bluer, a little more somber, okay? And those are valid reasons. So we're going to move down to the modern tab down here. Now, you can see this one looks really, really contrasty, so I'd probably have to do some things there, but it's an interesting kind of color process. Moving through a couple here. Modern 4 is pretty nice. This is really desaturated and pretty muddy looking. Modern 6, I think it looks really wonderful though. You can see there's just a slightly different tonal difference here. The blues are getting a little bit more into that aqua range, which I kind of enjoy. And what that's doing also is enhancing some of the greens in the background, which I think need a little punch anyways. You can see it's also changing the yellows to a bit more of an orangish warm, and you can see the oranges are changing to a bit more of a red. So there's a pretty strong color shift happening overall with just that one profile. Now again, there are plenty of profiles to choose from. Vintage is down here as well. Vintage is probably closer to what some of the film profiles might do. So some of these have some lower contrast. They kind of replicate much more pulled film in terms of what it provides in terms of contrast. So much lower, lower, lower. So it's kind of shifting those shadows into interesting areas, and sometimes flattening them out to where the shadows are almost the same as midtones. But I like my Modern 6 up here, so I'm going to keep that. So once you find one that you like, you can hit close and just go back to your regular basic menu. But you can also choose the amount in which this profile is being adhered to your photo. So if you want to kind of double the effect, you can bring this up to 200%. And you can see that it's shifting colors really crazily, okay? I don't think I want to go that far. I think a little too far on this looks pretty nice, but maybe let's find us something in between. Hey, you know what? Fuck it. Let's go to like 150. I think I like that quite a bit. And that'll give us some more options to play with. So I'm choosing Modern 6. I'm at approximately 150% of that profile. I'm going to click close. Now that won't affect any other settings you already have going on. So temperature and tint aren't affected. Vibrance and saturation are not affected. None of my hue, saturation, and luminance are affected. Okay, so it's just the profile. So this is an immediate effect that takes place. It's just treating it as if the actual image itself, the file itself, is entirely shifted. And from there we have a good base point to start with. So I already have some more interesting color information to deal with rather than what my camera has already processed from. And that's a great place to just take some editing points from. So next is going to be our white balance right here. Now the white balance is going to be the same thing we can change on our camera. This is typically choosing what kind of color cast you're kind of photographing in. So if you're photographing outside and you're kind of on auto white balance, it's probably going to shift into daylight balance. Whereas if you're going inside, it might read more of a tungsten or fluorescent based if you're in the school and we have those nasty green lights, or if you're at home and you're just turning on some lamps, okay? But you can certainly choose and change these in Adobe Bridge as well. So as shot is just where it was in your camera. And again, every camera processes it a little bit differently. So your daytime calibration might be a little bit different than my daytime calibration. And the daylight calibration on here might be different than what your camera says. So it's okay if it doesn't match up exactly what you already have. But if you're shooting on daylight, it's probably going to start in daylight, which is pretty fascinating, pretty cool. So you can certainly do as shot. You can do auto, and auto does a pretty good job most of the time. Auto is just looking at the entire image and trying to neutralize all the tones altogether. Auto is not bad. We can certainly do daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten, which are just your light bulbs inside. Fluorescent, again, is our light bulbs at school, those long tubes. Flash, okay? Or you can do custom. Custom is just if you change these knobs, anything other than what the presets are for those individual white balance profiles, that's what custom is going to be. And you can certainly move back between all those as much as you want. So as shot and auto, my custom down here, etc., etc. So these decisions might be based on knowing where you already made your photograph. So the lighting in my photograph is actually pretty complex and pretty unusual. I'm using a flash on top of my camera, but I'm bouncing that flash off a wall to the left, and on that wall is a painting with a bunch of different colors on it and also some brown cabinets. So it's casting some warm light and also some kind of unusual kind of reddish tones as well. I also have some hot lamps on both sides of her, adding some kind of warm light into her hair, and I also got some window light coming in from the background. So I've already got 3 different types of color cast information in this photograph, which is why it's giving me some interesting color information kind of all together. So I might do auto and kind of play with it from there. This does neutralize some things. But I might also choose to say that her skin tone looks a little red. So I might shift those greens over a little bit. Okay. Maybe that looks a little cool still, so I might just warm that up a little bit. All right. Now that's going to turn into a custom profile here, and if I shift to something else, I can always go back to that custom and it'll still be there, which is nice. So again, I'm just looking for something that looks good, all right? Now it doesn't have to be accurate. Accurate can be whatever you want it to be. Photographs are known to lie. They don't have to tell the truth. And at the end of the day, it's just going to be your truth. You're the one that took the picture. You're the one that gets to interpret how it gets to be shown. So we can, between just those two things, the profile and the white balance, we have a pretty good color profile to already work with. What I'm going to do is do a couple edits just to make this image look a little bit better. So it looks a little underexposed, so I'm going to do a little bit of that. Raise my contrast, lower my highlights, maybe open up my shadows and compensate for my blacks. All right, add a little texture, add a little clarity. Now, I can now choose how crazy I want this to be. Now I kind of leave it a little more neutral, I like a little more desaturated tones, but if you like something a little more punchy, you know, jump up the vibrancy, jump up that saturation. Now there's always going to be nuance in this, as we've discussed before, so if we're jumping the saturation up, might want to also lower the vibrancy to make some adjustments. So we're kind of looking at what's supposed to look good. Now in terms of this portrait, right, I don't want her to look like Trump here, I want her to look like a normal human being, so I think some balance would be pretty good. So why don't we say something around there, maybe around here, okay? Still got some life in her skin. I get to have a little bit more saturation in some of these. Maybe I'm not so happy, I don't know. Maybe just a little bit here. Yeah, so a little bit of life in the skin. I get a little bit more vibrancy and saturation in some of the green tones, and the jacket still looks pretty good. So again, just in this basic panel, I've made some pretty robust color changes. You can see how this yellow is totally different, the blues are different, the reds are different, the skin tone's different, the colors in the window are different, right? So we're getting a much more stylistic version of this photograph that didn't exist before, which is great, okay? But we're not done yet. No, we're not. We've got 2 more tabs we can play with. So if we're on the first tab here in Basic, we're jumping in 1, 2, 3 to the 4th tab. We have what's known as our hue, saturation, and luminance adjustments. So if you've watched the color lecture already, you'll know that the hue adjustments are talking about the individual colors in which we're talking about. So these are all the colors that are available on our color wheel. The saturation is the intensity of those colors, and the luminance is the brightness, so the tonal value, the tonal shifts of those colors and hues. So if I want to just move certain colors around, maybe I'm not happy with this yellow or this blue or this red or these greens, I can shift those a little bit. So maybe I want to adjust this yellow some. I'm going to go to my yellows and oranges a little bit. Maybe I want these to be a little bit more orangey. Maybe I want them to be a little bit more green. Okay? I'm going to make those decisions. So maybe I want a more vibrant kind of banana looking yellow. All right? And maybe I want this red to be a little more orange. Or maybe I want this red to be a little bit more magenta. Okay? I can make those decisions here. I'm liking this magenta. I'm liking this more banana yellow. I'm okay with the blues. That's kind of why I picked that profile in general already. But I am going to play with these greens a little bit. So I like this more kind of hunter green. It's more intense, almost like an emerald. I really enjoy that. That's really nice. So again, some basic edits here, just punching up some of those colors here and there. So that's pushing the colors into the general area that I want them to be. They're more exact of where I want them to be. They're not just that red, they're a very specific red. So now I can go over to saturation and see how intense I want them to be. Now again, if you watch the lecture, there's a small section on kind of aggressive colors and more passive colors. Now I usually use the saturation to control those aggressive colors. So the most aggressive color I have right now is this really vibrant red right around her neck. So I can certainly lower the saturation of that red. The problem with that is it's going to lower the saturation of all the reds in the image. And if you're looking at her face, her lips go a little bit pale, her headband goes pale, and some of the colors in the background go a little pale. So I don't want to go too much on this because I'm afraid of making her look a little dead. So I'm going to just go lower it a little bit, right? I don't want to go up too high, otherwise it's going to start blasting out, but just a little bit more so it's not so saturated. Now I can kind of help those things out as well when I go to luminance. So I can decide how bright I want that color to be. So again, if I want those reds to be a little darker, not so aggressive, I can just tone those down a little bit. And this doesn't really do kind of damage to either side of her face, which actually looks pretty good either way. So you can have more bright lips, you can have darker lips, both works fine. So again, I'm just trying to kind of lower those aggressive tones so the rest of the image stands out nice and evenly, and that's pretty good. Now I could also do some more things with my colors around here. Maybe I want my greens to stand out a bit more. Maybe I want my yellows to stand out a bit more. Okay. Now the fun thing about these color shifts is that it's going to be happening holistically around the image. So again, yellows appear in a lot of skin tones. So if I'm going too deep on those yellows, you can see she looks really flat. If I'm going too high, her skin tone looks really contrasty. So I want to be really careful, and I want to make sure I'm paying attention to the entire image to see if it's working overall for everything. So I might play with the oranges, play with the yellows to follow suit. Maybe I make these blues a little brighter so they stand out some more. Okay. So again, some pretty big color shifts that I've made there already, which is pretty cool. And that's your hue, saturation, and luminance adjustment panel. The next panel over, one more piece of control, is called split toning. Now this is usually used on black and white images to give a certain tonal value, a certain color value to those images, so they're not just neutral black, whites, and grays. We can certainly use this to just add some interesting tones to some already color information existing in the photograph. So what you can do here is decide what toning you'd like to exist in all of your highlights and what toning you'd like to exist in all of your shadows. And then you can balance those tones out so one kind of takes over control more than the other. So typically how I like to do this is to pick a color opposite of each other or complementary. And typically I like to look at the already existing color information and either enhance it or bring more contrast to it. So if I'm looking at my highlights, so the brightest parts of my image, I'm seeing some greens and blues out in the window, which aren't really a primary focus of mine, but I'm also seeing some warm tones in here, especially in the jacket, and I have a lot of skin tones of those to deal with. So if I wanted to enhance those warm tones, I might choose a color more along the orange or yellow range, okay? And you can see when I start to saturate those, it just saturates just the highlights, okay? Just the highlight information in the image. You can see the shadows in a lot of these areas aren't changing at all because this doesn't affect those areas. So you can choose to enhance those colors, or you can choose to add more contrast to them. So instead of adding the color of what I think it should be, I'll do the opposite. So I'll add blue instead. What that'll do is just kind of tame some of those colors down a little bit, which is also quite interesting. Now again, I always want to make sure this is complementary for the most part. So instead of doing a warm tone up here, I'm doing a cool tone. So I'm going to use a warm tone in my shadows. So the opposite of blue would be kind of an orange. And I'm going to saturate that a little bit. So the cool tones, or the shadows, are starting to become a lot warmer. Now again, this image is already pretty warm by itself, so I'm just going to add a little bit here, and then I'm going to play with the balance some. So I'm really kind of leaning more towards into my highlight panel. So you can see this balance bar goes from light and dark, right? So bright over here, dark over here. So if I want to put more weight into my highlights, I'm just going to drag this bar over here, okay? Now, you don't always have to use both tones. You can certainly just add toning to your highlights, which I think I'm going to do, especially in this case, because it looks better. So I'm going to get rid of the saturation of the tone in my shadows. So no matter what color I choose, if the saturation is at 0, it won't affect it. You can certainly do some wacky stuff, right? So I'm just going to add a little bit less balance to this, a little bit less saturation. I kind of like the balance of those tones. That looks pretty cool. All right. So just like that, right? I moved through a couple panels here, and I've changed the color information of the photo entirely. It's an entirely different photograph, and it's fantastic, okay? So you can see the greens are entirely different. The oranges are now reds. This bright yellow is now more of a banana yellow. The blues are a little bit more aqua, okay? These are all some different minor touches that are really going to just push the color information where you want it to be, which is fantastic. Now that I showed you how to do that through all of these menus, I'm going to show you how to do that in a really quick and easy way. So up top here on the tool panel, the first, second, third, fourth, fifth tool over, it's called the Targeted Adjustment Tool. Now, when you click on this, it's just going to give you a basic kind of tool right here. But if you hold down your mouse on top of this tool, you can choose exactly what you'd like to shift. So hue, saturation, and luminance, when I click on one of these, is going to take us to the exact same panel that we were in earlier, the hue, saturation, luminance adjustment panel. Now, instead of using the sliders, which pop up on the right over here, it's going to give us a tool to drag over the image. So right now I have the Targeted Adjustment tool selected. I'm going at hue, which is just the color itself. And instead of using these sliders, I can click on any color I want in the image and then drag up or down to change which way it's going on the slider. So let's say I want to adjust these yellows again. I'm going to click on this yellow. You can see the cursor change. And if I go up, you can see the sliders on the right shift, and you can see the colors in the image shift, right? So you can do some really quick adjustments just by clicking around the image. So here's my yellows, here's my reds, here's my blues, and my greens. Okay. Those are the 4 kind of colors that are making this tetradic up, so those are the ones I'm focusing on. And once you're satisfied with your hues, you can go back up to your target adjustment tool, use your saturation, do the same thing. I'm just clicking on whatever color I want to adjust. This is just a really nice visual way to choose how you want to edit colors. And finally, I'm going to go to luminance. Maybe I want this jack to be brighter. Maybe I want this scarf to be a little darker. I want to click on these skin tones and drag those a bit. I want those greens. I want those to tone down. Okay? You can just go fucking nuts, all right? And you can just kind of go do that ad infinitum until you want to stop, all right? So that's the easy way to do it. I should have showed you that last just so you can understand how it's adjusting those things. But your basic panel, you got your profiles, your white balance, vibrance and saturation, your hue, saturation, and luminance, hue, saturation, and luminance adjustment panel right here, which are linked to your targeted adjustment tool right here. And then finally your split toning tool right there, all right? So 3 to 4 really powerful tools that can shift your colors around. And maybe I'm not happy with this, and that's okay, but I can always do as many edits as I want, all right? Click on done. Going to compare it to my other edits over here. And again, I've got some different edits that I can play with. So I still like this middle one the most. It's kind of the one I played with. It's a lot more subtle in terms of what I'm doing, but I wanted to give you some more exaggerated changes so I can show you the differences between them, all right? So I hope you found this useful. Please use these tools with subtlety and with care. Do not just go in here and change everything willy-nilly just so you can. But please, please, please do play with it. But just remember, you're making good photographs. You're not just changing things for the hell of it. So if you have any questions, please give me a shout out. You can find me on Discord. You can send me an email. If you need to get a hold of me, that's where you can find me. Enjoy. I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks, guys.